struggling to express in words just how significant of a discovery this is.
A massive man-made structure has just been discovered beneath the pyramids in Giza.
That there are enormous structures underneath the Great Pyramid that go kilometers deep into the earth with coils.
So awe-inspiring and narrative-shattering that I have been sitting here for the last hour trying to wrap my head around the implications of what we were just told.
During a news briefing released Saturday, the researchers said an immense structure extending 2 kilometers beneath the surface was clearly man-made. But even more surprising is that beneath these large spiraling pylons, there is an even larger chamber structure.
Obviously, this discovery is extremely controversial. It runs as a complete contradiction of the established narratives and status quo in mainstream academia on these issues.
Using advanced deep scanning technology, the scientists reported evidence of a vast underground city stretching over 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles, under the Giza Plateau. The scan revealed huge spiral structures plunging approximately 600 meters, about 2,100 feet below the surface, as well as enormous box-like chambers and networks of tunnels.
Clear there is obviously significant structural engineering taking place deep below the pyramids, but it also provides the most extraordinary evidence for a pre-flood era civilization that was flourishing in a way that we can scarcely comprehend.
Because the implications of this find mean that we have been very wrong about how we tell history, and it isn't one of those things that is up for debate. A colossal man-made structure that goes 2 kilometers deep below the pyramids means they had a level of technology that is unexpected. And yet, we can't hide away from the data. We will look at how stupendously huge this structure is and how much technology and effort went into building it. Then we will see how the ancient Egyptians were telling us about this structure in many of their texts, but we misinterpreted those as myths. And if this turned out to be true, then what else did the ancient Egyptians tell us that could also be true? The myths of Tepi, or what they called the first time, or maybe the halls of Amenti, and discuss what it might mean for our understanding of the technological capabilities of ancient Egyptian civilization. The Deep Scan survey revealed a complex assembly of structures hidden in the bedrock far below the Giza pyramids. The key findings can be summarized as follows. The radar detected 8 vertical, cylinder-shaped shafts beneath the pyramids. These shafts are essentially huge wells, each about 648 meters deep, approximately 2,100 feet, or nearly twice the height of the Eiffel Tower. In cross-section, they appear as large, hollow cylinders. Significantly, each shaft is surrounded by a spiral ramp or pathway winding around its interior walls. This gives the impression of a corkscrew or spiral staircase wrapping around a deep pit. The shafts are incredibly straight and narrow relative to their raw depth. Their diameter has not been explicitly stated, but images suggest they might be only a few tens of meters wide. According to the data, the 8 shafts are arranged in 2 parallel rows running roughly north-south. This alignment places them under the area of the 3 pyramids. In fact, the cylindrical structures were found underneath each of the 3 pyramids and appear to serve as access points to this underground system, Chikolo noted. In other words, it seems each pyramid has at least one of these deep shafts beneath it, potentially connecting to it, which all link into the larger network. At the bottom of the 8 shafts, the radar images showed 2 colossal cube-shaped voids, or chambers. Each is roughly 80 meters by 80 meters by 80 meters in dimension, about 260 feet on each side, essentially giant underground rooms with a volume comparable to a 20-story building. They have been described as massive cube-shaped structures in the reports. It's not clear if they are perfectly cubic or just roughly rectangular, but the phrasing suggests fairly regular geometric rooms. These 2 huge chambers appear to sit below the level of the water table, if one existed, and are the terminus of the spiral shafts, meaning the shafts merge into these open spaces. One way to picture it, imagine descending one of the spiral ramps for 600 plus meters. At the bottom, you emerge into a titanic vaulted hall carved in the bedrock. According to the radar, there are two such halls, which could be side by side or stacked, possibly one under the Khafre area and one extending more towards Khufu or Menkaure. The sheer size of these chambers, each 80 meters across, means they rival the footprint of the pyramids themselves. In fact, Nicole Ciccolo remarked that the existence of vast chambers beneath the Earth's surface, comparable in size to the pyramids themselves, has a strong correlation to ancient legends, a reference to the Halls of Amenti, which we'll discuss later. The revelation of a vast engineered complex beneath the pyramids is surprising on multiple levels. It challenges some of the core assumptions Egyptologists have held about the Giza pyramids and the civilization that built them. For over a century, the consensus has been that the pyramids are elaborate royal tombs and nothing more. While they are marvels of construction, mainstream Egyptology has viewed them as essentially glorified stone mausoleums built around 2500 BCE for pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. There has been little evidence to suggest they had any other function. However, the newly identified subterranean structures challenge the long-held belief that the pyramids served solely as royal tombs. If indeed there is a labyrinth of chambers and shafts below, it implies the pyramids might be just the visible capstones of a much larger project, possibly one with functional or ritual purposes beyond burial. It's as if discovering basement levels and utilities in a building we thought was just a solid monument. This shifts the perspective from viewing the Giza pyramids as isolated monuments to seeing the entire site as one connected machine or facility. It lends credence to those who have long suspected that the pyramid's interior passages and precise alignments were part of a larger system, for energy, initiation rites, storage, or something else. The discovery, as one report put it, adds fuel to fringe theories about the pyramids possibly having mechanical or energy-related functions. Before we get into the alternative theories of what the pyramids along with the shafts could be, we have to realize that if indeed they were tombs, they would be the perfect tombs. We have to remember that the purpose of the pyramids was to preserve the body of the pharaoh as he or she travels through time. It was intended to be a hiding place, a fortress to protect the king. At least that is what mainstream Egyptologists are depositing. Well, if that is the case, then this massive underground structure below the pyramids would actually be the perfect hiding place. Because even if someone knew that the body of the pharaoh was there, it would take an enormous amount of effort and industry to get there. But there is one big problem with this theory. If the spiral structure and the box structure beneath it were really tombs, then why did they feel the need to make so many identical spirals? No, there is definitely something else going on here. If ancient Egyptians, or whoever built this, possessed the knowledge to create such a complex, it prompts a reevaluation of their scientific and technical knowledge. For example, constructing stable cavities 80 meters wide requires understanding of rock mechanics to prevent collapse. Digging straight down 600 meters requires surveying and directional control, essentially mastering vertical drilling. Managing groundwater, if they went below the water table, and ventilation would be necessary for workers, implying some mastery of hydroengineering. All this in circa 2500 BCE, or earlier, is astonishing. It far surpasses what we've unearthed in terms of tools or writings from that time. We have papyri on how to manage bread rations, but nothing on how to dig giant holes. Thus, either the archaeological record is incomplete, likely, or these structures might date from an even earlier, more advanced time, which veers into lost civilization territory. Both possibilities force paradigm shifts. The former means Egyptologists need to broaden their view of Old Kingdom capabilities, and the latter would mean acknowledging advanced human activity in a much earlier epoch than currently accepted. From the moment this discovery was announced, observers have drawn parallels to ancient Egyptian myths and esoteric legends. The Giza pyramids and Sphinx have long been at the heart of mystical speculation, with tales of hidden chambers, lost knowledge, and even involvement of gods or Atlanteans. Now that a real subterranean complex has possibly been found, these stories merit a fresh look. Could Egyptian civilization be far older? In ancient Egyptian mythology, Zep Tepi, also spelled Zep Tepi, meaning the first time, refers to the primordial epoch when the gods themselves lived on Earth and established the order of civilization. It is essentially the Egyptian creation time, the moment when the world emerged from chaos and the sun rose for the very first time. Texts refer to it as a distant golden age. For example, the pyramid texts and later writings describe how the land was created in Zep Tepi and how the god King Osiris ruled during that period. While mainstream scholars view Zep Tepi as a mythic concept, comparable to, say, the Greek Golden Age or the biblical Eden, some researchers have speculated that it encodes a real historical memory of a very ancient high civilization. This idea was popularized in the 1990s by authors like John Anthony West and Graham Hanccock. They suggested that the monuments at Giza may not date to 2500 BCE, but to a much earlier time, perhaps around 10,500 BCE, when a cataclysm, often hypothesized as a flood or the end of the Ice Age, occurred. The alignment of the Sphinx in Orion's belt around 10,500 BCE, a theory by Robert Buval, was cited as a potential marker of this earlier date. In these alternate histories, Zep Tepi is identified with a time happened 12,000 years ago when survivors of a lost civilization, sometimes linked to Atlantis, began Egyptian civilization. Notably, American mystic Edgar Cayce gave readings in the 1930s-40s, claiming that refugees from Atlantis built the Great Pyramid and other structures around 10,500 BC, establishing Egypt as a new center of knowledge. Cayce even predicted that a hall of records from Atlantis would be found under the Sphinx in the late 20th century. Now, how does the 2025 discovery connect to this? Well, if the underground complex is real, it suggests that the Giza Plateau's development was far more complex than our records show. Conventional history says the site was developed around 2600 to 2500 BCE, Old Kingdom, possibly on virgin bedrock, though some pre-Old Kingdom tombs exist nearby. But if a huge complex is under there, one possibility is that it predates the pyramids. The pyramids might have been built on top of a pre-existing underground infrastructure. This echoes what some ancient Egyptian sources imply. For instance, the so-called inventory stela, though of late origin, speaks of Khufu finding the Sphinx already there and restoring it, rather than carving it anew. If indeed an advanced complex existed, the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty could have utilized it or built above it, with their own constructions being a continuation of something older. This scenario would effectively push significant construction at Giza back by many thousands of years, potentially into the time frame of Zep Tepi, the fabled first time. It's crucial to note that Egyptian texts themselves don't give a year for Zep Tepi. It is mythical. But later Egyptian priests, as reported by the Greek Solon and others, allegedly gave extremely old dates for their civilization. Solon was told of an Egyptian record going back 9,000 years before his time, 9600 BC, which, interestingly, is the time of the end of the Ice Age, and close to Hanccock's proposed 10,500 BC date for a lost civilization. The newfound structures, being so far beyond known Old Kingdom works, naturally lead some to suspect they might be evidence of that early forgotten era of construction. Could this be a remnant of Zep Tepi? People are asking. If a sophisticated culture did exist around the end of the last Ice Age, they would have had the motivation, and perhaps technology, to create something like a massive underground refuge or facility, which fits the notion of building chambers underground perhaps to withstand cataclysms. At this juncture, such connections are speculative, but even the project's spokesperson entertained them. Nicole Ciccolo drew a parallel between the vast chambers found and the legendary halls of Amenti, more on that soon, indicating the team was aware of the mythic resonance. Another outlet explicitly mentioned Zep Tepi in context, 36,400 BC, the historical time of the Zep Tepi theory, suggesting that some theorists might place these structures as originating even tens of thousands of years ago, long before dynastic Egypt. While 36,400 BC is extremely conjectural, coming from interpretations of the Dendera zodiac or other symbolic numbers, the point is that the discovery has reopened the debate about the true antiquity of advanced culture in Egypt. The Sphinx is the colossal statue of a reclining lion with a human head that sits to the northeast of Khafre's pyramid. Traditional attribution says it was carved around 2500 BCE by Pharaoh Khafre. But this is not definitively recorded in any inscription, and over the years evidence has emerged suggesting the Sphinx could be far older. The most famous evidence is the water erosion weathering on the Sphinx's body and the walls of its enclosure. Geologist Dr. Robert M. Schoch of Boston University studied the Sphinx in the early 1990s and observed deep vertical fissures and rolling undulations on the limestone walls, which he identified as damage caused by prolonged heavy rainfall, essentially precipitation-induced erosion. Yet the Giza Plateau has been extremely arid since about 3000 BCE, with only occasional rain. Schoch concluded that the Sphinx's core body must date back to a period of much greater rainfall, at least 5000 BCE or earlier. In fact, he later extended his estimate to roughly the end of the last ice age, at 10,000 BCE, as the likely period when the major weathering occurred. What does the new discovery have to do with the Sphinx? Potentially a lot. If there are tunnels or chambers under the pyramids, might similar structures lie under or around the Sphinx? Interestingly, Sphinx lore is rich with tales of hidden chambers. There is a persistent legend, and some amateur evidence, of a chamber under the Sphinx's paws. In 1997, a seismographic survey by Thomas DeBecke and John Anthony West detected anomalies under the Sphinx's front, prompting speculation of a void, though it was never excavated. The Hawass and Lehner team did find and clear some tunnels around the Sphinx, including one on the north side sometimes called Campbell's Tomb, but nothing publicly acknowledged as a large chamber. However, the Halls of Amenti, Hall of Records legend, next subsection, specifically places a repository of knowledge beneath the Sphinx. We should also mention that there are ancient Egyptian texts that speak of hidden chambers of records. One example is a text from Edfu, Ptolemaic period, that talks about primeval mounds and the establishment of sanctuaries in the Tepi. Some fringe authors interpret those as hints of construction of archives by divine beings. Additionally, the myth of Osiris's tomb being hidden could relate. Osiris, as lord of the underworld, was said in one tradition to be buried on an island under the Nile, or under the Sphinx, according to some tales. From a mainstream perspective, Amenti is just the West, and the concept of Halls of Amenti is later mysticism. But it's fascinating that the discovery's own announcers are willing to bridge that gap. It shows the profound way in which this find captured imaginations. It's not often that scientists use mythic language. Here it seems they did so to convey the grandeur of what they think they found. Implications if Halls of Amenti were real. If indeed a record hall or repository is down there, it could be the greatest archaeological prize of all time, potentially containing texts or artifacts from the dawn of civilization. Some have mused, what if those massive cube chambers were libraries or vaults? They could hold stelae, scrolls, if preserved, machines, statues, or the bodies of very ancient personages. While this veers into speculation, it's the sort of thing that many are thinking. The team did mention wanting to determine the function of each chamber eventually. If they find one chamber filled with e.g. sarcophagi, it might be a colossal tomb, maybe the legendary tomb of Osiris or of pre-dynastic kings. If another is empty but with strange features, maybe it was an energy chamber. At this point we can't know, but the Halls of Amenti concept encapsulates the hope that these spaces hold ancient wisdom or remnants of a bygone epoch. If true, that means the Sphinx has undergone modifications across vast time spans. The idea of a much modified site fits with a scenario where the underground parts could be extremely old, the Sphinx body old, and the head and pyramids somewhat newer, relatively speaking. Essentially, Giza might have layers of construction from different eras, the original layer being lost in prehistory, Tepi times, the later layer being the 4th dynasty pyramids. The Halls of Amenti, legendary subterranean chambers of knowledge. One of the most intriguing mythic connections to the Giza discovery is the reference to the Halls of Amenti. This term comes not from classical ancient Egyptian texts per se, but from a blend of Egyptian and later esoteric tradition. Amenti, or Amentet, in the Egyptian language referred to the West or the underworld, essentially the land of the dead ruled by Osiris. The word shows up in funerary texts. For example, the deceased in the Book of the Dead might be said to go to Amenti. However, the specific phrase Halls of Amenti is popular in occult and New Age literature, notably in a work called The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, a 20th century text attributed pseudepigraphically to the wisdom god Thoth. In those writings, the Halls of Amenti are described as deep under the earth, where ancient wisdom is kept and where initiates can undergo transformation or communicate with immortal beings. One passage from an emerald tablet, Tablet 2, reads, "Deep in earth's heart lie the halls of Amenti, far neath the islands of sunken Atlantis, halls of the dead and halls of the living, bathed in the fire of the all-knowing one." It portrays Amenti as a real place underground, associated with Atlantis and containing records or spiritual power. For decades, this was considered sheer mysticism with no evidence. Yet, the allure of a hidden library or chamber of knowledge under Giza persisted. Edgar Cayce's prophecies explicitly mentioned a hall of records buried near the Sphinx's right paw that would be discovered and contain records of Atlantis and ancient history. Some fringe researchers equated this hall of records with the halls of Amenti. Now what's striking is that the team's spokesperson, Nicole Ciccolo, herself invoked the halls of Amenti when talking about the find. She said, "The existence of vast chambers beneath the Earth's surface, comparable in size to the pyramids themselves, has a remarkably strong correlation with the legendary halls of Amenti." Some esoteric sources describe the halls of Amenti as a place where the flower of life, a mystical symbol, is preserved or where an energetic gateway exists between worlds. Without getting too speculative, let's stick to tangible connections. The notion of underground halls bathed in fire, or energy, could tie to the idea that maybe the chambers were used in some form of power plant or ritual that involved energy, electrical or vibrational. Nikola Tesla speculated that the pyramids could be part of a wireless power transmission system, essentially tapping into Earth's telluric currents, an idea that overlaps with Dunn's power plant theory. If that were true, the underground chambers might have housed some equipment or elements of that system, for example water, chemicals, or particular minerals to create resonant effects. In an imaginative sense, that could be the fire of the all-knowing one in the Emerald Tablet quote. One of the most profound implications of this discovery is what it suggests about the technological and engineering capabilities of ancient Egyptians, or their predecessors. Egypt's Old Kingdom achieved remarkable feats: the pyramids themselves, the carving of hard stone statues, the transportation of huge obelisks, but modern scholarship has often emphasized that these were achieved with relatively simple means: copper tools, stone hammers, sheer manpower, sledges and ropes, etc. There have always been artifacts and construction techniques that stood out as anomalously advanced or unexplained given that toolset. Now, with evidence of possibly even more advanced construction, like deep underground work, those anomalies demand a fresh look. Let's consider some key points and examples. The pyramids are aligned to true north within a tiny fraction of a degree, and their blocks, especially in the internal chambers, are fitted with almost machined precision. This already hinted at a high level of surveying and planning. The new findings of geometric subterranean structures, perfectly cylindrical shafts, massive right-angle chambers, reinforce the idea that ancient builders had a command of geometry and precision engineering that rivals modern capabilities. It's one thing to pile stones to make a pyramid shape, it's another to drill perfectly round shafts hundreds of meters deep or carve cubic rooms that don't collapse. The latter suggests advanced understanding of structural engineering, knowledge of how to prevent cave-ins, perhaps using the rock's natural stratification or adding support in ways we can't see until we go down there. Could they have had rudimentary tunneling machines or techniques? For instance, did they use fire setting, heating rock then cooling rapidly to crack it, along with pounding? Did they know how to make bronze or iron tools earlier than we think for such special projects? The tech implications are numerous. It may force historians to consider that the Old Kingdom, or an earlier culture, had metallurgy and tools beyond just copper chisels. Some fringe theorists have even posited that they had ultrasonic drilling or some form of energy tool based on drill marks seen in hard stones at Giza and Abydos. Those ideas were fringe, but the magnitude of this project lends a bit of credence that something more than hammerstones was at play. In various museums, like the Cairo Museum's pre-dynastic exhibits, one can find extremely fine stone vases and bowls from the earliest periods, Nakata Tui through early dynastic, c. 3500 to 2800 BCE. These vessels are made of very hard stones like diorite, granite, schist, etc., and many have thin walls, symmetrical shapes, and narrow necks, basically feats of craftsmanship that are hard to replicate even with modern power tools. Archaeologist Flinders Petrie was astonished by some of these in the 19th century, noting tube drill marks and lathe-like tool use. How were they manufactured? Mainstream theory suggests a combination of bow drills with abrasives, hand carving, and maybe hand-powered turntables. But the sheer quantity, tens of thousands were found in the step pyramid complex of Djoser, for example, and the uniform precision of many pieces has led some engineers, like Christopher Dunn, to assert that advanced lathing machines must have been used. If Egyptians in 2800 BCE could mass-produce elegant stoneware that we struggle to replicate, it implies a level of technical skill often not acknowledged. The possibility of a large underground complex in some ways rhymes with this. Both indicate a capacity for complex projects requiring specialized knowledge, whether of mechanics or geology. It might be that the same society that invested in making splendid stone vases also invested in hidden architectural marvels. Egyptologists have long maintained that Old Kingdom Egyptians had only copper and later bronze tools, since no iron tools have been found from that era. Iron appears later and was rare, often from meteoric sources. Copper, even with arsenic to harden it, is relatively soft. It dulls quickly when cutting granite or quartzite. Yet the builders carved through granite for the internal chambers of the Great Pyramid, and possibly through even harder rock if they made those deep shafts. Giza bedrock is limestone, which is softer than granite, but to reach 600 mm depth, they might have hit basalt dikes or other materials. The unexplained aspect is how they maintained precision and efficiency with such tools. Did they have access to harder cutting edges? Perhaps they used chert or obsidian as cutting edges? Or, as some suspect, did they have an early form of iron or steel, unbeknownst to us? The term biat in the Great Pyramid workers' graffiti might refer to iron, suggesting maybe small amounts were used. If this discovery pans out, researchers might start looking for evidence of high-strength tools at Giza. Maybe at the bottom of those shafts some broken tools remain. If indeed there is a labyrinth of chambers and shafts below, it implies the pyramids might be just the visible capstones of a much larger project, possibly one with functional or ritual purposes beyond burial. It's as if discovering basement levels and utilities in a building we thought was just a solid monument. This shifts the perspective from viewing the Giza pyramids as isolated monuments to seeing the entire site as one connected machine or facility. It lends credence to those who have long suspected that the pyramid's interior passages and precise alignments were part of a larger system, for energy, initiation rites, storage, or something else. The discovery, as one report put it, adds fuel to fringe theories about the pyramids possibly having mechanical or energy-related functions. Re-evaluation of Egyptian knowledge. If ancient Egyptians, or whoever built this, possessed the knowledge to create such a complex, it prompts a re-evaluation of their scientific and technical knowledge. For example, constructing stable cavities 80 meters wide requires understanding of rock mechanics to prevent collapse. Digging straight down 600 meters requires surveying and directional control, essentially mastering vertical drilling. Managing groundwater, if they went below the water table, and ventilation would be necessary for workers, implying some mastery of hydroengineering. All this in circa 2500 BCE, or earlier, is astonishing. It far surpasses what we've unearthed in terms of tools or writings from that time. We have papyri on how to manage bread rations, but nothing on how to dig giant holes. Thus, either the archaeological record is incomplete, likely, or these structures might date from an even earlier, more advanced time, which veers into lost civilization territory. Both possibilities force paradigm shifts. The former means Egyptologists need to broaden their view of Old Kingdom capabilities, and the latter would mean acknowledging advanced human activity in a much earlier epoch than currently accepted. Huge shout out to Jay Anderson. You can find him on social media with the handle, The Project Unity. I'll leave the link to his channel below.
Struggling to express in words just how significant of a discovery this is. What has just been announced in relation to the pyramids at the Giza plateau and the plateau itself is so incredible, so awe-inspiring and narrative shattering that I have been sitting here for the last hour trying to wrap my head around the implications of what we were just told. So this is pretty much breaking news because the new findings were announced on the 16th of March at a press conference held by the team who were studying the Great Pyramid of Giza with a non-invasive technology that was first developed by Filippo Bionde and Corrado Malanga called synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography. So this was used to explore the internal structure of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And this method leverages the analysis of micro movements typically generated by background seismic activity to achieve a high resolution full 3D tomographic imagery of the pyramid's interior and subsurface components. The recent findings from deploying this technology are nothing short of mind-blowing, because what's been discovered is that there are huge structures coming down from the base of the pyramid deep into the bedrock, in fact over 600 meters deep, which then connects to structures that extend up to 2 kilometers below the surface of the ground. 2 kilometers. Massive internal structures connected to the base of the pyramid and extending deep, deep down. This is what we know so far. Utilizing high-resolution radar images from Capella Space and Umbra, which are 2 private companies that specialize in satellite-based synthetic aperture radar imaging. This has allowed researchers to create a 3D model of the internal structure of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now, this model has revealed a previously unknown chamber with 5 horizontal levels and a sloping roof, which in of itself is an architectural design unlike any previously documented in the Giza Pyramid. But the most shocking discovery lies beneath the surface, below ground level. Radar tomography has identified vertical cylindrical structures extending for hundreds of meters beneath the pyramid. There are 8 of these cylindrical wells arranged in 2 parallel rows, descending to an astonishing depth of 648 meters. Even more intriguing, at the base of these structures are 2 massive cubic formations measuring approximately 80 meters in diameter. The tomographic data suggests that these are vertical wells with intricate spiral pathways. Now, this design not only implies a functional purpose, but also a level of sophisticated engineering that completely blows the dynastic Egyptian model out of the water. I mean, the pyramid itself was already a massive red flag in the ancient Egyptian historical narrative. But now, with this discovery, I think it's become impossible to say that the Egyptian civilizations that we understand, that we've been taught about, were responsible for building these structures. And it doesn't even end there. The radar analysis extends beneath the entire Giza plateau, revealing interconnected structures beneath not only the Great Pyramid of Giza, but also those of Khufu and Menkaure. The subsurface network reaches down to a staggering depth of approximately 2 kilometers. 2 kilometers. This is not possible, given the standard historical and archaeological narrative given to us about ancient Egypt. Now, I'm hearing that there is more to come. There is a 4-hour presentation that's going to be released by the research team. This is what I'm hearing. That's going to go into every detail of their findings. This has essentially been a strategic release of incredible data ahead of time to get people interested. And I am more interested in this than basically anything else right now, because this is by far the most provocative piece of evidence for not only a potential technological explanation for the purpose of the Giza complex, but it also provides the most extraordinary evidence for a pre-flood era civilization that was flourishing in a way that we can scarcely comprehend. It's also possible that this spiraling cylindrical series of structures are staircases, and I can't help but think of the channeled writings of Thoth the Atlantean, the emerald tablets, speaking of a lost hall of records, a sacred hall of knowledge below the Giza plateau, the halls of Amenti. Could this be the lost hall of records from the pre-flood era? Now, obviously, this discovery is extremely controversial. It runs as a complete contradiction of the established narratives and status quo in mainstream academia on these issues. This will cause big waves throughout the academic and the wider world if they can fully evidence these findings. But the results so far seem pretty clear. There is obviously significant structural engineering taking place deep below the pyramids and the Giza plateau in general. Has this changed your mind on the pyramids? Has this strengthened your position on what they might have been? Has this new discovery given you any new ideas about what the implications are?
Don't miss our last episode where we cover the most powerful speech given by the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. This speech will change the fate of Afro descendants everywhere. If you want us to do an episode on the connections between this finding and the hidden chamber in Padang Padang, let us know in the comments. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.